I hope you enjoyed the exciting denouement of Eric. Who could have predicted that being excited about starting school would eventually lead to the death of three-quarters of a family? When we think about school stories ideologically, it's clear that they are asserting and confirming a set of beliefs about what makes a good man of the ruling class. We talked about some of these issues when we thought about the ideology of the gentleman in Tom Brown. At that time, we focused on positive assertions of how to be a gentleman. Of course, another way to induce readers to follow a certain ideology is through negative examples. Bunter is a great example of this. A useful rule of thumb is to do the opposite of whatever Bunter chooses to do. Bunter lies constantly and not very well. A gentleman should tell the truth. Bunter loves to eat. A gentleman can enjoy a good meal, but shouldn't be greedy or too invested in pleasure. Bunter squeals in pain when he is punished, and even in expectation of being punished. A gentleman handles pain stoically. Bunter is afraid of the dark. A gentleman has pluck. Bunter is rude and disdainful to social inferiors. A gentleman is confident of his own position and therefore polite to those of lower standing. Bunter is a braggart and a thief. A gentleman downplays his accomplishments and status, and a gentleman never steals. Eric raises the question of bad boys in a different way. The narrator makes sure we understand throughout the book that Eric is a good boy, but that he doesn't have the strength of character to resist the various temptations and bad influences of school. This is asserted as a problem of Eric's innate response to certain kinds of challenges. He is proud and wants to do things on his own, which is good, but which can also lead to the kinds of terrible choices Eric makes when the people around him fail to understand him or help him appropriately. Thus, Eric can too easily slip from being good to being a bad boy. In our magnet stories, we're back at school this week after the Christmas holidays. Now is a good opportunity to think about how boys can go wrong and what the stories are telling readers about how to be a proper gentleman. We meet again some of our old friends from the beginning of the magnet sequence, including Coker. Coker is clearly not a role model for boy readers because he is very, very stupid. His stupidity leads him to overestimate his own powers. Those of you who have ever met a stupid person are probably familiar with this trait, the inability to accurately understand one's abilities that derives from not knowing how much one doesn't know. But Coker is basically a good boy and a gentleman. He doesn't lie, he has courage as revealed by his foolishly rushing into ill-considered danger, and he has a sense of proper authority, even though that sense is, of course, tainted by his denseness. Snoop and Skinner are bad boys. They like playing tricks on others and have no guilt about the consequences of their actions on others. The stories portray them as the sort of boys one might meet at school and decide to avoid, because they are not susceptible to good influence. Vernon Smith is the interesting bad boy in this story. While today's story focuses on Bunter's misguided attempt to get away with things in Mr. Steele's class, talk about not understanding how stupid you are, it introduces Vernon Smith's animosity toward Steele, which is going to be a primary concern of the next couple of stories. Vernon Smith is the son of a very rich man who earned his money through speculation. In the moral universe of the school story, this is not good. A gentleman should inherit his money and live on the income of property and investments in government bonds. Speculation and trade are both illegitimate sources of wealth, and speculation is much, much worse than trade. As an aside, Bunter's father is a stockbroker, one who aids in speculation, and that is part of Bunter's ambiguous class position. So Vernon Smith's class position is ambiguous. His nickname is the Bounder, which means someone who is trying to fit into a class above his real or natural one. He has too much money for a boy his age, and it gives him a sense of entitlement that will come back to bite him later in the series. He doesn't have much regard for the code of gentlemanly ethics that a boy like Harry Wharton follows without question. He doesn't respect authority at all. Harry and the famous five don't like or trust him. But at the same time, Vernon Smith demonstrates some qualities that suggest he can be salvaged. He is fiercely unafraid of anything, and he takes physical punishment without a peep. He is a take-charge kind of boy. You can imagine him as a future military leader who would be terrific at thinking on his feet, if perhaps a little cavalier with his men's lives. In many ways, he already acts as the future leader the school is supposed to be creating out of the boys. The only problem is that his leadership is primarily selfish. He doesn't think of the good of the school or his classmates, but rather about what he wants. This week in the forum, we're going to think about the various kinds of bad boys we've met in school stories. If we were using the language of narrative studies, we would term these boys antagonists, characters that the protagonist or lead figure reacts against. Antagonists exist to allow the protagonist to show what he or she is really like. They challenge the protagonist morally and thus propel the action of the story. How do bad boys in school stories help convey the story's ideology? How do writers use these figures to help delineate the qualities of a proper gentleman? How do these antagonists help move the stories forward?